Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Global Development. I'm Amanda Glassman, and I'm a senior fellow here working on global health and other kinds of data issues. And it's amazing because what day is today? The 19th, and we had 150 RSVPs for this event, which tells you, of course, we have attrition because it is December 19th. But I think what it shows is that the topic, which is data for development, data revolution, is one that has really ignited the imagination of a lot of different groups, both in DC, in New York, and beyond. And we're fortunate today to have Johannes Jütting and Elisa Mohamedou from the Partnership in Statistics for Development in the 21st Century, which is Paris 21. They'll be talking today about their efforts to discuss the why, what, and how of the data revolution. And that's good because as thousands of initiatives blossom and as we each have our own deeply held desires and wishes for the data revolution, it's starting to become the time to converge on a shared definition, at least among some of the key stakeholders. So this event will help us, I think, to move in that direction. I just want to say one thing about some work that we're doing here at the Center for Global Development. We've been running a working group over the past year that some of you have been involved in called Data for African Development. We're doing that work jointly with a think tank in Nairobi called the African Population Health and Research Center. You may know of them already. But the idea is also to feed in to these ideas and actions that are swirling around the data revolution. So with that, I'll invite Johannes and Lisa to come up. Johannes is the manager of the Secretariat within the OECD's Development Cooperation Directorate. And Mohamedou is a senior program coordinator. And they'll talk a little bit about the where, what, and how. Then we'll have a discussion with your comments and questions and go further. Thank you.
Okay. So, good morning, everybody. Amanda, thank you so much for this kind word of introduction. Thanks to all of you for coming. Holiday season is approaching, and we really appreciate this great interest in this topic. Is my data revolution like your data revolution? That's the question of today, and as Amanda has said, there are many different initiatives around talking about the data revolution. The term has been coined in the high-level panel report, which was issued end of May this year. In the high-level panel report, there are two terms coined: data revolution and a new global partnership on development data. And I had the opportunity to talk to the lead author, Homi Karas, when he came to Paris to the OECD, and I asked him, you put this very nice term into the report. What did you have in mind? Could you just, many people start now to talk about it. Can you just give me the three things that you had in mind while coining this term? And he said, I have no idea. And he said the main idea was basically to raise political awareness and support for the issue of data and data production. And I think he was very, very successful with this. And he said, I leave it to the data community, I leave it to the statistical community, I leave it to the policy development community to define the term. Now we are more or less 6 or 7 months behind the first time we heard about this term. What we try to do is, Elisa and myself, and we will both speak, is to give you an idea where we think the debate currently is. We're trying to synthesize a little bit the debate under 3 main headings. Why do we need a data revolution? About the what could be in there, and about the how. Obviously, I think we are even not at the end of the beginning of the discussion, so we are really interested in your comments, in your thoughts, obviously also in your questions, but please don't expect from us to give you, to leave this seminar today and you have the clear vision what it all is about, but I hope we can give you some pointers. So Paris 21, often Paris 21, people think about Paris, the city, and maybe the 21st district. Well, Paris has only 20 districts, that's one issue. And we are not the 21st district in Paris. We are even not based in Paris. If we take it literally, we are based in Boulogne-Billancourt, which is just close to Paris, but it's not Paris. We are also not only statistical nerds. I mean, we have a team of maybe 15 people, and we have people with a strong statistical background. But neither Elisa nor myself are statistician by training. I'm a development economist and agricultural economist. And well, what we are is we are a global partnership. So Paris 21 has been created at the margins of the implementation of the Millennium Development Goals. It's a global partnership between data producers and data users with international organizations, donor countries, and developing countries. We organize events, data users and producer dialogues. Our main focus is promoting statistical capacity development. We strengthen statistical capacity development in poor countries through the dissemination of these so-called national strategies of the development of statistics. But we also increasingly look for innovation. We look for new ideas. We try to think a little bit out of the box. And then hopefully others will pick up ideas that we jointly with our partners try to think about. And these innovations could be maybe put in two different buckets. One would be more on the institutional governance side. I will come back to that in a moment. And another one could be more on the technology side. I wanted to start with showing you a video Paris 21 organized at the margin of the UN General Assembly in September in New York. We organized an event, Engineering a Data Revolution. And this is a 3-minute video which gives you some sort of flavor what other people were thinking at that time, what a data revolution is. And maybe you will see some familiar faces even here in the room. So if I can ask Mike to start the video, please.
Welcome everyone to the most important event at the General Assembly in 2013.
This is a window of opportunity which is right now open quite wide and that will close quite quickly.
All the talk this week about getting to zero, the extremely welcome talk about getting to zero, requires a data revolution because it requires us to know who is in poverty and how their lives are changing over time.
I know that there's been fantastic improvement, but in many ways it's still really lousy.
Demand and supply are not in sync. We just need more data, and has been shown times and times again.
And there's now that urgency to get out a lot more data.
It is impossible to provide some policy recommendations for your members if you have not a large access to relevant data.
And it's also about empowering people.
The data revolution is about increasing the pace of development. But in terms of data, that means better, faster, cheaper data, and ensuring that data is used in the process of decision making by all data users.
And there has been, of course, a lot of capacity built also at the country level. It may not be enough, more can always be done, but I think we need to start with recognizing these achievements and then say, we will build on.
It's also about capacity beyond national statistics offices.
Thanks to an extreme evolution of mobile technology, of information technology, that enables us to collect data and speak to people ultimately.
We want to have fast information that will be able, that will enable our national and local executives as well as the people themselves to get information.
If data is open, we can better track progress and we can better hold everyone to account for that kind of progress.
On the how, I think we are only at the beginning.
Everyone should share that one singular goal for results.
We need to find a way which is not heavy, but which helps us all to sort of do better together.
Then perhaps donors have to fund statistical systems differently.
The major investment in relation to capacity building has to take place in the government statistical agencies. I think there is an improvement.
We can come up with some basic powerful words like data is power, data empowers, data leads to empowerment.
Data revolution, as the statisticians of the world unite.
So you saw a lot of interesting thoughts about the why, the what, and the how. And we will come back to this, trying to synthesize a little bit what has been said. But the meeting, as you could see, people were very engaged, a lot of good ideas. But it's also important maybe to step back for a moment. Everybody likes to talk about revolution, but eventually, actually, we are talking about an evolution. And some of these bits and pieces, for those who are in the business, and yesterday we were at the World Bank, and many people said, well, we knew about this for quite some time. So for some of us who have been in the business for quite some time, they say, okay, we knew about this. I think it's also important to step back and to look at political processes. And we have Shaida here, who was very much involved also in drawing up the Busan Action Plan on Statistics, which I think is a very, very interesting and very, very important plan that the international community agreed upon, with these 3 items: fully integrate statistics in decision making, which now everybody buys into, promote open access and use of data, and increase resources. So it's important also to see where we are coming from when we're looking ahead. Now, these are the 3 questions, and I will now hand over to Elisa to guide us a little bit through why do we need a data revolution.
Why do we need a data revolution? There's some of what we're doing is actually dealing with old problems that are lingering, that haven't been addressed in the past years. Another issue as well is that we have to address emerging priorities that have been identified either in the high-level report or in all the processes of consensus building that are currently underway. There are also some new opportunities that are linked to technology, that are linked as well to new stakeholders coming on board. And of course, there is a very important lessons that we've learned from the MDGs so that we don't make the same mistakes, but we also build on some of the successes in our view that have been achieved through the MDGs. The old problem, first of all, is what is a data gap? We're all called for filling those data gaps, but data gaps have to be first defined. First, there are some cases where data doesn't exist, just plain is not there. That's the case for fragile states where there has been a sort of years where we don't have the data, others in areas where we don't have the data. In other cases, the data exists, but it's not in usable form for users. And in that case, there are some projects that are currently underway that help put this data into a usable form. For example, sometimes it just sits in the computer of statisticians in developing countries, either in Excel sheets on the personal computer, or sometimes just printouts there. It's just not usable for any analytical purposes or predictive purposes for that matter. Then sometimes data exists in usable forms, but nobody knows. There's a case of a very large donor agency that one of the statisticians there decided to look into the poverty data that exists in terms of surveys that exist in that institution. And it's a very large one, which I'll keep unnamed. And looking at the expenditure and income data that is existing, and out of 94 countries, how many do you think did not have a survey? Any guess? 1? Okay, I see there are very, very few optimists here. There were 5 only. Out of the other countries, the survey data was there. It was just not. And this came out in the call for funding for further surveys. And this person just said, the data is actually there. And it is there. So out of the 94 countries, they all had that existing data, except 5 of them. In other cases, the data exists, it's in usable forms, people know about it, but no one knows how to use it. It hasn't been used for any analytical purposes. And of course, there's the case as well where data exists, it's usable, people know about it, people know how to use it, but no one really cares about what comes out of it. That also exists. Another, and this is work coming out from this hosting institution, is about also how you see the problem. And on the left side, you will see data, and this is the net primary enrollment rate. You will see the data as is seen by a developing agency. The darker the blue, the more data is available, and the higher the rate. And then the second part is how the country seizes it. They're not really interested in that part. They're interested in, on a regional and sub-regional, sub-national level, where are the clusters, where do we have to intervene? And that's what's really important for them in terms of planning purposes and policy device. And then there's, of course, the old problem of communication. You might have heard of this case where Ghana actually revised its baseline, and the GDP number increased drastically, and that did create quite a lot of controversy for that country, but for African data in general, there have been some speakers coming out talking about bad data coming out of Africa, putting in question the whole credentials of some of the data that was out there. And what was happening there was just a normal process of revision of a baseline, which in other countries happens a lot more often and therefore doesn't trigger that type of controversy. In this case, because funding was not available for 22 years, the jump was very high. So it's a question of communication in this case. So that also is an old problem we have to address. And then I want to show you an example also of just the cost of bad data. And this is some very interesting work that is done by the Secretariat of the Pacific Community with whom we work. And so they work with 22 Pacific islands. And there is an ILO definition of employment and unemployment. The way the survey goes is the question is asked to, within the survey, what was your main work in the past week? And there, at that level, start already the problem, because work is not the same as activity for some people. So in a sense, what you have is then the moment people say, well, I didn't work at all, they're put in a certain category. If you ask the question, did you actually do any activity, which doesn't seem to work here, but that would be having a few, oh, where should I point actually? To the right? It's not there, so I'll just use the old method. Yes, exactly. If you ask the main activity, you get a different type of set that you can already take into account. Then you ask, did you do any work for pay? You also have another subset. And so the moment you do this, you start taking up you increase the numbers of the people you have. So I'll show you some of the results of what happens. You have here in the model 0 is the question as it is in terms of unemployment according to the ILO. Then what you have an unemployment rate of 16%. If you do take the people who say, actually I did, I'm doing subsistence fishing, automatically they come into the self-employed bucket, which is not the case. They're doing it because they didn't find another job. Or you have some women, and this has a lot of gender implications. What you do is when you start taking them and you go further with the question, you come to a 32% unemployment rate. That's quite a difference. And then if you just correct it a little bit with the people who say, I'm actually taking some classes because I can't find work, which they would have been put into the bucket of students, they are taken into account. So you end up having almost a double rate of unemployment. This has extremely important implications in terms of quality data and policy data. We cannot work with half of the unemployment rate here when it's actually double. This is really what's happening on ground compared to what is coming out there. This has also some implications that Johannes will be talking about in terms of regional benchmarking, global standards. How do we put out global standards when in some regions you have a type of activity that is not necessarily taken out into these definitions? And what happens now in the Pacific community, they are discussing now with the ILO, and they're trying to also sort of have that regional Pacific Island subset of questioning that would be taken into account. And we're going to work with them as well to assist them with the statisticians, because what happens is if you show any government, no administration is interested in this kind of jump. No one wants to put out this data showing that since they've taken power, this has doubled. Has nothing to do with their work. It has to do with the way the data was captured. So we're going also to work with them in terms of assisting the National Statistical Office put out the message in a way that doesn't harm them, because this also has direct implications on the National Statistical Offices. So that was an example. Then there are, of course, emerging data priorities that you're aware of. There's more use of, we are expecting more use of national data for jobs, in particular youth employment, but also for education, potentially on quality. You might be aware of this PISA study that is done in the OECD, of quality of 15-year-olds' knowledge about math and language, and there are calls now to have this as well in developing countries. Why should we only be generating data on quantity of people going to school and not just quality? So that's also coming out. There's, of course, a call on disaggregation of existing data for this getting to zero poverty agenda. Also the impact on women and girls. UN Women is putting out 52 indicators that they'd like everyone to look at for women. And it's not just disaggregating everything we're doing, having a line on women injury, but it's also specific indicators that have to do with resource owning, that have to do with domestic violence, that are going into areas that weren't tackled before. There's, of course, data that is required now on impact on inequality. This whole inequality agenda was not really present in the MDGs. This is also being called. And of course, there are new areas that are coming out: sustainable development, governance, the environment. These are new areas that some of these national statistical offices have to now tackle and find indicators for. And so, of course, all of this is happening within this post-2015 MDG development of sustainable development goals. And again, we have to look back at what happened with the MDG. There was some positive elements to it. First of all, there is certainly more data. There have been a lot of surveys funded. There's more data statistics that is available. A lot of the countries have taken ownership of that agenda and have continued the work after the funding was left. And of course, there are also statistical capacity efforts that we're putting into place. We work a lot on developing national statistical development strategies in countries where this brings together all the stakeholders that are generating and using the data in a country. That's very important because statisticians are often at the end of the government line in terms of priority and sitting at the decision table. But there have been as well problems with the MDG process. First of all, there have been data orphans. There are many countries that were not able to provide the data timely, completely, regularly on these. There have been also issues with national data that was often not used. You often see data from UN agencies and national data that don't match. And every year you will hear about these country delegations going to the UN when the UNDP reports comes out and complaining about this has nothing to do with data we have put out. It's different methodologies, but again, a communication problem and a feeling from some countries that what they're doing is not given the same level of credibility that what other agencies are doing. And of course, there is the crowding out versus crowding in. Reporting on MDGs is very costly, time-consuming, and there is the criticism that the national statistical offices have been taken away maybe from the priorities of the country just to report on these. And were these really the priorities for their countries? It has been very time-consuming, very costly, so there is as well that cost. And now I'll hand over to Johannes for the rest of the what.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So in terms of the what should the data revolution include? And maybe it's useful to start, what should it not maybe include, or what should we avoid doing? Sometimes it's just useful to think the other way around. And without stepping too much on the toes of Fumi Karas, whom I really appreciate, and the work of the high-level panel report is, I think, is great. In the seminar that we have seen, he basically proposed, his question was, how many global surveys do we need to get the data for the post-2015? I don't think it's the right question in the first place. I think we will not be solving the problem that we were trying to. You've seen the multifaceted of different problems that we just mapped out. It will not be solved by just running 150 global surveys in the next 2 years, getting the baseline, and then maybe 2 years later, another global wave of global surveys, and then another 2 years. It will not do anything. It might satisfy a couple of PhD students and New York-based and Washington and Paris-based analysts, because they will be happily using this data, crunching their regression analysis. But it will not make necessarily a change in the field. So I think this is not, I'm not saying I'm speaking not against using, I mean, I very happily use these global surveys myself, but it's not only about it, and I think that's very important. We should also not avoid, I mean, there's a very important report about the MDG exercise by a committee that the UN Statistical Commission was led with many different partner organizations, and there were very powerful measures, assessments on what worked and what didn't work so nicely with the MDG exercise. So let's not ignore these things. And then the other point, people get data revolution, people think about CAPI, of collecting data, think about big data, think about open data, think about technology, and they get all excited, and we give laptops to the poor, and we collect the data. I would be, I mean, as much as I would encourage this, and we have to look into this, but I would also put some water into that wine. We have to be also aware that many of the problems, we have this information paradoxon. In many of the countries where we would need the most data to do all the things that Elisa just pointed out, target to the very poor, target to the women or to the children, there's less data. So if we just, I mean, it's naive thinking on just believing only in technology. Actually, my take is that the data revolution is at minimum as much about institutional governance, political economy, as about technology. So I think that's my hypothesis. Happy to have your thoughts about this. Now, this is just in terms of giving you a flavor what other people think, and this is by no means a representative survey. We did a similar event at the European Development Days. This is a big jamboree that the European Commission is organizing once a year in Brussels. They invite people from all over the world, but the majority of people are based in Europe, I would say. And you can see in terms of background of participants who they came all to our event, so we would just do the same here. So we distributed a one-pager where we did a sort of little survey. And you can see a little bit background of participants in our event. So 1/3 business people, 1/3 academia, governmental organization, international organization, another 1/3 and media. So we basically asked them a couple of questions about the data revolution and allowed them to rank them between 0 and 10, giving a weight. 0, no importance, 10, important. So this is just a sort of giving a little bit a flavor of what, randomly selected people think in Europe or coming to that event. Who should lead the data revolution? And well, can you see any clear pattern? I can't see. I was a bit surprised that actually the academia people were, I think it's 14%. So many academia believe apparently they should lead the data revolution. I wouldn't feel so comfortable myself, I have to say. There are some other public-private partnerships. I'm not sure whether everybody understood what that meant, but I mean, people seem to have liked it as a category. So you see the tricky, anyway, how you ask questions, you get the results, and then you don't know what to do. So but what I wanted to show is a little bit that, well, who should lead the data revolution? Apparently it speaks to, it should be led by many people, right? I mean, maybe not one entity. Why do we need a data revolution? You can see, I mean, not enough consistent data over time for tracking change, not enough harmonized data for cross-country analysis, not enough reliable data. Similar, I mean, people seem to think it's all important. Similar, what is key to a data revolution? Improving comparability, open data, better disseminated data, coordination, also not a clear favorite. And what is the biggest obstacle? Here, at least funding seems to be an issue. And this is something it would be interesting to dive a little bit deeper. Is funding a problem because there's not enough resources? Which you could arguably say it's a problem. We have less than 1% of ODI, of overseas development assistance, is giving to statistical capacity to development. But there's work by the Center for Global Development, which I like a lot, is talking about perverse incentives of funding. That within countries and on the global scheme, we provide just wrong incentives. And we, for instance, if we have a country, we have national statistical offices see from each other day, there come a certain gentleman or lady from an international organization collecting data, asking for a survey for its specific pet project. And these can be very important issues, could be on gender, on employment, on education. And people start then to ask this gentleman or the NSOs, please run a survey. Here I have a couple of millions. And you get nice laptops, you can get nice cars, you get nice per diems. And he said, okay, I do that. Next day, another person comes with a different topic. So these people it's completely misalignment then between the agenda of these people who have very, very, I think, very good intentions. But the outcome overall for the people in the country is very bad. Because you collect all the data, they take it all away. What is the impact then for the country? So this relationship between global monitoring needs and national priorities, I think we really have to get that right. Now, let me more or less trying to summarize where we see the 4 points coming up of all the discussion, unpacking the data revolution. 4 points. One is it really should build on past successes. That's not revolution, could also mean we basically start from new. But we have some successes and we shouldn't forget about them. It's very clear we have to have more, nobody would object to have more relevant, timely, in particular timely data, open data, and reliable data. But this is also important, data for what? And often we forget about this as more in the statistical community. We want to have data that helps people to make better and more informed decisions. And more informed decisions for hopefully better lives at the end of the day, right? We want to save I want to reduce poverty, save lives, have better lives. And we shouldn't forget about this. And there's a huge also debate within the NGO community on accountability, transparency, which I think is very important. And then I briefly talked about the implementation. We should think about new ways of implementing things, new ways of funding, and also not forget about capacity development. I think many things, it's about capacity development, capacity development. Capacity development is a bit boring, and it's a long shot. People say, Paris 21 is there since 13 years. What is the increase of capacity? It didn't really change. Well, I mean, we talk about fragile states, we talk about very poor countries. You have to set up systems. You can't expect results. It takes time, so we should be accepting it might take some time. So while we want to go quickly for having more and better data, we should find a good compromise also in terms of building sustainable data, sustainable statistics. Now, we're coming to the end of the presentation, very quickly to the last part. How can we achieve, and this is as you can imagine, the most difficult part, and a few thoughts about this. How can we achieve? I think we have to think really out of the box. And in that sense, I like the term revolutionary. But we also should be realistic. And we should be, many people argue, well, we have to improve the international coordination of all these kind of things. And who would oppose to this? But I think we also have to see the reality. I mean, we have international organizations, and there's, to a certain degree, I think we can do something. But there's also the political economy. They have been built. So I think we can do some advancement, but also let's be realistic what we can really achieve and where to put the money and the effort to make, maybe go for the low-hanging fruit. I talked about strengthen what works, harness new opportunities. And I will basically talk a little bit about these new opportunities and about this idea of a global development partnership and new partnerships. So new opportunities. So the big game in town, besides the data revolution, seems to be big data. And I shamelessly stole this slide from colleagues at the OECD who work on this in the science, technology, and industry department. They are always at the forefront of thinking, and they come into this not at all from a development angle. They are interested of how big data can spearheading innovation in OECD and other countries. So they are not at all interested in the development dimension. And I learned from them that we are apparently now in the internet wave 3. So wave 2 was still web 2.0. Wave 3 something means like omnipresence of data. And big data, cloud computing, and machine-to-machine combined. And it's just amazing what you can see. I mean, we see the interest in the data deluge. We have the data scientist, and all these different things work together. So that's possibly exciting, and obviously the question is, does it have to do something with the development? Well, there are some applications, as you can see here, in energy, health in particular, where we can see big data in health, transportation, and education, where possibly big data can have an impact also on development or for some positive impact of even possibly for low-income countries, but in particular maybe middle-income countries. So just in terms of numbers, there seems to be 3 different things. One is the growing amount just of data, it's really difficult to relate to these numbers. Growing capacity to analyze them and growing ability to store the data. But now what can we do? You may have heard about the Billions Prize project here based in the US at MIT. Tracking inflation rates. They put out the inflation rates within 3 days, and normally it takes a month. This is unemployment prediction by two German professors, or one German professor using Google Insights, how to track unemployment rates for Germany. And then we have, maybe you have seen from the Google flu trend analysis, and where you could look in terms of if people type something related to an illness and flu, and how that matched with data from the Center for, CDC? The Center for Disease Control. And you can see, I mean, it's a very close match for a certain amount of time, but then it's completely overestimated. So this graph shows you the beauty and it shows you the challenges. So big data, is it really reliable? It can be for some time, but it can't. And obviously, that's a problem for official statisticians, because they would say they have a big problem with this, because you have to produce data that is really serious and vetted. And this is just only giving you a flavor of the potential, but also of the potential challenges. And I like this a lot. This is data work that I only knew since a couple of weeks, actually. People from Orange, from the French mobile company, put out cellular call logs, cellular data for Ivory Coast, and they started to put that data out and ask people to compete, and many US universities, I think a lot of them, won prizes using this data for purposes related to development, and there is exploiting cellular data for disease containment and information campaign strategies in countrywide epidemics. So there is sort of initial examples where it's really interesting how cellular data is used. They haven't yet reached out to the national statistical offices, and we as Paris 21 believe it's our role to bring these two communities at least together so that they talk and see what is the advantages, what are the limitations of this kind of new form of data, which is out there and which we will be seeing becoming even more important in the next years. Another thing which I think I mentioned in the beginning, let's not only get excited about this technology opportunity, there are many things happening on what I would call in the public-private partnership sphere, in the governance arrangements. And we have public-private partnerships in health issues, sewage. Why not thinking about public-private partnership in statistics and data collection, data production? And this is not a purely public-private partnership, but there is I like this social weather station in the Philippines, which is an NGO producing poverty data on a relatively regular basis. They started up to do that because they were unhappy with the time it took from the official statistical system to produce that data, so they stepped into this market niche and they produced the data. It's apparently of a reliable quality. So you can see, and eventually it would be nice if you think about how to link these social weather stations to the national statistical offices and to see if there's a possibility of a non-for-profit and more government-led partnerships. So these kind of things we will be looking more into. Now, there are some hard questions here for national statistical offices, and I would wonder if we have a representative here from a national statistical office. Can I see a hand? Not really, no. But we had this discussion also just recently in New York, where the Open Working Group had its meeting about the Sustainable Development Goals, and for the first time the Statistical Commission and from the statistical community was invited to speak to the Open Working Group parliamentarians, if you wish so, and we had the opportunity to present there as well. And there are some key questions for the national statistical offices. Take on a new mission as a trusted third party whose role would be to certify the statistical quality of these new sources. Is that something we should look into? Use non-traditional sources to augment and perhaps even replace their official series. Issue statistical best practices, quality frameworks, the use of non-traditional sources and the mining of big data, and be given legal power to collect personal information. These are important questions, I think, that we will be seeing and that we need to discuss. Now, this is some sort of a summary. What I'm trying to say so far was basically there are trade-offs and we need to strike a balance. On the one hand, I talked about the need, and now what we would dispute, we need global comparable data to make peer reviews, to make good judgments on the international level, but we also need to monitor at the national level. So we need to find a balance here. We need to find a balance between official, non-official, and maybe semi-official, and high and low quality. But maybe the question should actually be more about high and low quality than about who produces it and how we label it. But the other important thing, real-time data. We see the need for real-time data, and we have this initiative, Global Pulse, trying to put out data very quickly into the hand of decision makers. Many are very frustrated about the time it takes to get the data, in particular if you have natural hazards, like in the Philippines, you need the data very quickly. So there's a trade-off between having quick data and is it wetted and is it reliable, and we need to think about this. Innovative approaches, some I mentioned, and global standards, and open data and privacy protection. So these are maybe useful ways of thinking about trade-offs. Now let me come to the final part, thinking about a new global partnership. Maybe it's useful to think who could be the new partners in these things, data collection and sharing. And this is just a few ideas of who could be in there, data harmonization and coordination. It's like thinking about different buckets here. Linking data, accountability and transparency, different groups here. This is not an exhaustive list, it's just a way to start a discussion. New sources of data. funding. And if we put it all together, we have like this. This looks nice. I like. So we could discuss obviously about the different buckets. We could discuss who should be in there, but I think it's just a possible way of thinking about it to be create a global partnership. I think the main idea would be that each of these groups could dig very deep and do their job, while they would be contributing to some sort of a global public good that needs to be defined, and there could be a secretariat providing funds for these different buckets and ensure that there is at least some sort of coordination. This is just this really is brainstorming. It changes every other day when I give a presentation. But maybe your feedback would be very much appreciated. Well, and we are very happy to have just started a project, or will formally start next year, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which will help us to really dig deeper into the many things that I presented to you today. Yeah, let me conclude. Maybe 3 quick points. So to answer the question, is my data revolution like your data revolution? Well, no, probably not. It will look very differently in very different settings, and we shouldn't forget about that. But however, there are some common principles that we think are important. There's the issue of better coordination, in particular at the local level and at the regional level, and we can try hard on the international level. We need increased support and better support. Strengthening capacity, it's key. Increased accountability, so the linked data for what. And at the end of the day, we shouldn't forget about the better policies. At the end of the day, when policies are not only based on better data, we know that they are often policymakers get a lot of good data, and they still do decisions not at all based on the data. We also have to be realistic, but it's important to bear this in mind. And as I said, I think at the end of the day, it's about hopefully leading to policies that lead to better lives. So with this, we want to thank you, and hope we have I'm sure we have a nice discussion. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now we'll take a round of questions and comments from the audience. I have my own questions, but first I'll let you have your say. Anyone? Go ahead, Paul. Go ahead, and please introduce yourself and say where you're from. Maybe stand up.
Great, you're raising me, and thank you. I'm Paul Eisenman. I'm an independent consultant, but formerly a colleague of Johannes. Mike is up. Oh. Hey Ben, I'm a great admirer of Paris 21 and really happy to see the progress that's being made, and I think it was a great presentation. Just a couple of points for the next time you give this or whatever. I think quality really should have made it to your final list, and I think you should avoid confusing communication and quality, as if quality is just, oh, we couldn't communicate it right. No, that's really got to be vital, and reliability and validity and comparability over time, as well as across countries. Not that you didn't mention these things, but it didn't come out in the summary. And then also the other big thing, it seems to me, at the end that needs more emphasis is demand. You know, it's not just you produce stuff and do people care about it. It's what's really being demanded. And if you think of a horrid example in the US, there have been prohibitions against collecting data about who has revolvers and assault weapons. And in developing countries, you know, not everyone wants to have data gathered about the absenteeism of teachers or health workers. So there really needs to be quite a strong emphasis on demand. And that, it seems to me, reinforces very much the importance of things like the MDGs, the importance of various civil society pushes for transparency. And again, so, you know, as I said, I thought what you did was great, but these are things that could maybe get some more emphasis. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Paul. Let's take 2 more comments. Front row.
Ivan Josa, and Independent Data. consultant. I just want to follow up on what Paul said on that demand side, because I think that's just going to be the key. Except I want to raise the stakes on that in terms of that. No matter how much we produce this data, speaking from a developing country perspective, I'm yet to travel to one of the countries in Africa, which I do often, and hear politicians clamoring for more data, for more data. So, and I'm yet to go to also to an international seminar where they talk about this is how we're getting politicians in developing countries to start to use the data. So at best, you have politicians at the meso level, at middle level, who attend international seminars and learn how to analyze data, how to use the data, but they don't make the decisions. They go back to their countries and everything falls on the wayside. How do we start to address that cultural shift, which must happen if we want to really address that demand side on a meaningful basis? Thank you.
Excellent comment. In the second row.
Hi, thank you. My name is Sheda Badi, and I don't know how to introduce myself, a big advocate of development data. I wanted to thank, first of all, for this session, this terrific presentation. Congratulations to the presenters. I wanted to also challenge the definition of the data revolution just a little bit. I think we need to differentiate between the business as usual in the international statistical world and the data revolution. There is a lot of work is being done and is undergoing, and even if we didn't have the data revolution, and with all the due respect to Homi, even if he had not had this report and talked about data revolution, there's a lot of improvements that's happening in improving the data linkage to the demand, quality, openness, and whatnot. So I think we should differentiate, account for that, but differentiate between those activities and what we need to do over and above for the data revolution. And I think for the data revolution, the over and above is what key, and we need to spend a little bit more time in defining that, of how much more we need to do for taking advantage of new opportunities. I would not put a cross like Johannes did on technology, for example. That's tremendously important, and we have to do that. So the new opportunities, I think, is what we need to do to define and dig in a little bit more. What I'm afraid of is by putting the whole thing and the kitchen sink into the data revolution, from all the business as usual improvements and the new opportunities, we get so cluttered with what we need to do. So, and that actually, if you take that, it would simplify the process and the how much more. And we can talk about that, of course, more. But the second comment, a very quick comment, is that there are a few things in the new opportunity which is tremendously important for this presentation to include. And one of them is, for example, geo-information. More on subnational, I know is mentioned, but the geo-information is one of the important elements of the data revolution. I think the openness, the whole openness agenda is huge. And we've seen the McKinsey report that just came out of saying what are the sort of the economic opportunities from that. So that's another element that needs a little bit more attention in the presentation. But overall, this is terrific. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, I'm going to let our speakers respond. I also wanted to add another question for you that was suggested here at the end. How inclusive should this effort be? And is there another dilemma here between being inclusive of all the different organizations that are involved in this space versus results on some of the key features of statistical systems in key countries that we'd like to see? I mean, I'm trying to imagine how that big color wheel would work in an individual country. And would we be seeing more of the same kind of aid coordination problems that we have? Or how would a public-private partnership really work differently at the country level to produce the kinds of data that's useful for decision makers? So, go ahead.
I'll take up two of the questions, two of the comments. One was on the demand and the communication. I think you're right, even though they're both linked. In some of the cases, the data does exist, but it's not allowed to come out. And I'll give you the example of the Pacific community as well. For example, there's data on life expectancy that is extremely controversial. It does exist. It does unfortunately show a reverse trend. The national statistical officers are not allowed to take it, to bring it out. It's existing, it's there, you know, because it would have quite a lot of implications in terms of how things are going in there. So that I think both are linked. In terms of the data requests, I beg to differ on that one. I think exactly in Africa, the trend is actually towards asking for more of that. I used to work at the African Development Bank, and I can tell you that the number of governments who were asking for more data to be put out is extremely high. Some of the work we're doing now is also to work with others in the countries, and not just the government, the journalists, so that we also work in terms of the data literacy, and for them to understand really what is this data out there, what can we do. We're also working on the sort of government at large with the parliamentarians who also come to us and say we want to be able to have an evidence-based interaction with the people who are in the administration, and for that we need to be also more literate about what this data is so that we can understand and we can request as well. So I think you can have doubts about the data that is put out there, how it's put through these open data portals. It might not be the best way, but the demand is actually there. It's really there. Yes, about the wheel getting rolling, I think I'll let Johannes do that one.
So first, these are really great points, and thank you so much. And many points I take just as a suggestion how we can further work on and integrate them, and I think particularly the geospatial suggestion and how we can also include the demand side are very well taken. So thank you so much for this. Now on particular, just on the demand side, the demand side of the whole thing is obviously very important, Paul. That's a very important point. You mentioned the link to communication. I would also link up to the funding. We've seen in many African countries, I think I only mentioned it in bypassing, that many of the data and statistics are funded from the outside. We at Paris 21, we measure at this stage, we measure of how much money is giving globally to statistics, to a called report press. But we also started to collect numbers on how much money is giving internally. And it's only, I believe, if internally countries start to give in own money, so the National Planning and Finance Ministry sees the need of producing data by themselves and invest into statistics, and that might make a change. So it's really the demand side within the country we also have to increase, and I personally believe there's a lot of latent demand. The economists use the term of latent demand. If the statistics and data is shaky and you don't trust them, you will look for something else. But if you think it's of good quality, you will ask it. And also, in this same context, we often think only about policymakers, but what we have in mind, and this the Gates project will help us. The Gates project will look at supply and demand in 10 countries. We want really to dig deep to understand. And for us, the challenge is not only to have the data ready for post-2015, and I see this whole data revolution beyond the post-2015 and beyond the SDGs, but in the overall environment, measurement frameworks, results frameworks, monitoring frameworks. So if parents would have better data to track in terms of the school performance of teachers, or if you have as a citizens the possibility to track the quality of public services provided to you, the health services, transportation services, that's a long shot. But these kind of demand, I think that's where we have to look into. And if it hasn't really come through the presentation, we will make sure next time we put more on this. So the point is very well taken, and we have given it some initial thoughts. I mentioned already the great points by Shaida, the new opportunities, the openness agenda. The first point of Shaida and your point maybe are somewhat relinked. I mean, how big do we want to have the debate, and should we separate it a little bit between business as usual and revolution? And you asked how it could look like in practice in countries. Well, it's difficult for me to answer this because I think you are all invited to answer that question, and I see myself here not as an advocate for this per se. I mean, I think for us, what I think is interesting is to start to look for practical on-the-ground examples, and some of the things I mentioned very briefly on is looking for public-private partnerships. Can we find a couple of where in the developing countries where government agencies, national statistical offices cooperate with either for-profit, an NGO, or non-for-profit, non-for-profit NGO or for-profit company to eventually source out the data collection, to source in NGO data and publish it then. So I think we need to look for these exciting examples. We also need to look for, we discussed this morning, with increasing training and education on these matters. Again, linked to the demand side. Data scientist is now a great word. I think maybe for national statistical offices need to have people who are these data scientists, that we could look, maybe there's an appetite for looking what it would take to help people to get the necessary skill set to deal with these things. So what my advice, I mean, while it's interesting intellectually at some point in time how we shape the buckets, I agree with you. We have in parallel started to think about real examples on the ground and see what works and what is maybe already working and documenting this. That would be my take on
Interesting. First row then.
Hi, I'm Catherine Elkins. I've been working in evaluation and monitoring and evaluation in the developing world for about 20 years. And just moved up here to join Westat in Rockville, Maryland. So we do a lot of surveys. And, but my focus primarily has been field projects, working in development overseas. And I'm gonna drag you back to quality, although Paul left again. I mean, I felt like that got lost in the responses completely. And I look around the room and I see many people who probably have, like I have, seen the pendulum swing back and forth. Big data or more data or which indicators, converging indicators, global comparisons. I think one of the big problems is that when we get into the details of the data and what we're going to use it for, we don't make that connection between data for what, and we make decisions based on bad data, and therefore people don't demand data because it kind of sucks. You know, it's not that helpful, it's not that good quality. They know with their experience in country that it's not answering the questions that they need to have answered. So that drives demand down. And I think thinking about quality as the center of what needs to drive what we're doing here pulls other things together. When you demonstrate what you can do with good quality data, demand goes up. When you have useful data for the questions that you need in order to make policy or program decisions, people want to use it. And the people who are collecting the data are driven to get good data for you and to tell you when you're asking a stupid survey question because they know how people do things in Senegal or whatever it might be. And so I think that, you know, really engaging all of the stakeholders from the point of data collection to the point of data use is totally dependent on quality. And when you don't have that at the core, people become disengaged and lose the plot.
Yeah, very good point. Okay, second row, then third row, then fourth row.
Hi, my name is Peter Goldstein. I work for Intermedia. We're a global research and evaluation group. We do a lot of work in developing countries around the world, including in Africa. And I think this is a great conversation, and I think you brought up a couple of really key issues. One on the supply side, if you will. I think that the situation, particularly in a lot of countries we're working in now, data collection is becoming increasingly a hot potato. I think it's a question of ownership. It's a lot of issues in countries, particularly with more and more data being collected by outside organizations. There's a lot of issues that are arising with national statistical agencies, and I think it's important to make sure that whatever we develop, they understand that they have an ownership role. I mean, just to give you an example, in one country, which I won't name, they've noticed that there's a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of money coming in to do research, and as a result, the government is basically cutting the funding to the statistics agency and telling them, well, you can raise the money by the money that you get from other organizations that want to collect, and we basically will make you the monopoly player in data collection so that you can do that. And this is a trend that we're seeing in a lot of countries. So I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that when you want to have local buy-in by stakeholders in the countries, you need that stamp of approval by the statistics agency, and raises a lot of questions about, well, are they really in a position to play that role? Do they need the capacity to do that? So that was one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing was what you mentioned as far as making sure that people actually use the data. I think that's also a critical thing. I mean, you can have wonderful data, but if it's not presented in the right way, if you don't create the coalition, if you will, to really support that at a policy level, then it's really kind of worthless. So I just wanted to emphasize that as well. Thanks.
Great. Right back.
Thank you. My name is Jean-Marc Bernard. I'm from another global partnership, the Global Partnership for Education. And I wanted to share with you, and thank you for the presentation. It's a very interesting discussion we have together. Our board of directors just approved a data strategy, and there's a lot of things that are interesting in that one. Maybe for people who don't know the Global Partnership for Education, we are working in the poorest countries in the world, 59 countries, mostly in Africa, but not only in Africa. And our board of directors is constituency-based. So we have representatives of developing countries, donors, civil society organizations, private sector. So that's quite interesting. And we proposed recently to the board 1 month ago a data strategy. And we refer to this data revolution wording. Basically, on the board approved and support this strategy. Our support to countries is support to education sector policy based on the Dakar commitments. You have a credible plan, we will support you. So that's a general approach, so that's country-driven. And in our process, the data strategy proposed that part of the requirement of a credible plan is the data. Where are you in terms of data? So during my presentation, I mentioned where we were in terms of data in education. And basically, when you want to do analysis on 59 countries for education, you have to go two years back to look at the data. And even when you are 2 years back, you have 20%, between 20% and 35% of missing data on key indicators, depending on the level of education you are. And people ask me, why are we in this situation? My answer was, as everybody was around the table, because we were not serious about it. Nobody is asking systematically, do we have the data we need for developing and implementing the policy? So now we put this in the strategy, meaning that each time we will work with country, we will ask where they are in terms of data, and it's not a punitive approach. If you have problem with data, let's have a plan to deal with that and use our financing to do that. So it's quite a constructive approach. And I would like to flag an aspect to my own interpretation of data revolution. I think that's not about technology, even if technology is playing an important role in that. I think the shift is more moving from systems that are providing data, information, or for statistical reporting to systems that will inform monitoring and management. You mentioned a lot the political decision, but there's a huge improvement, at least in education system, at management level. If you use the data, which doesn't, all these little decisions don't take a big political thing, but will make a huge difference in terms of learning, etc. I think that's also a piece that is important. I would be happy to have your view. Of course, informing the political decision is important, but we should not forget that there are people monitoring, managing the system, and it's probably not only true for education, that could make a big difference in terms of results at country level.
I think administrative data is one of the issues, and the quality of administrative data has been really ignored. And then you're also raising another issue, which is that each sector is now going to have its own data revolution. And how does that intersect these sectoral revolutions with the core statistical products and the capacity to produce those core statistical products with quality? In the fourth row, and then here.
Hi, my name is Matt Detman. I'm with a company called ICF International, and we've worked with Westat and also with Intermedia in the past. But I'd love to continue the discussion about capacity, about quality, use, but my comments more on the high level, which is with all the momentum around poverty reduction for the new Millennium Development Goals, it seems like a lot of the data, like Busan and everything, a lot of the discussion's been about accountability, and you mentioned empowerment and communication. I think that dovetails a lot with the goals of poverty reduction, and data at lower levels is very empowering. So maybe the empowerment angle can help drive demand and help improve communication. But that was my main point, is focusing on empowerment can maybe help with a lot of these other things.
Okay, over here, and then Misha, and then we'll let you respond.
Nancy Che from Development Gateway and AData. I wanted to build on the very good point that Shada raised about geospatial data and parse that out just a little bit more. Based on the experience that we've had. Development Gateway works in over 20 partner countries to implement aid information management systems. And there is growing recognition on the part of our governments that, and there's a growing demand for sub-national geocoded data as crucial for being able to understand whether aid is being targeted within a country appropriately, how to maximize the coordination and reduce the overlap across donor agencies, and how to empower governments themselves to be able to effectively allocate their own domestic resources in a way that's complementary and catalytic. I think that the World Bank's Mapping for Results effort proved the concept of the importance of subnational geocoded data, and I just wanted to say that I think this has been continued through AIDData's work with USAID, which will be in up to 15 countries subnationally geocoding that information. And with the countries that we work with, there's now a growing recognition that this data, the disaggregation of national data at the subnational level, is no longer a luxury but a necessity.
Okay, I hope so. Misha, and then we'll.
Thank you very much. I'm Misha Belkindas. I'm with the Open Data Watch. Thank you very much. I mean, it's a very interesting presentation, and I think that you've gone a long way, but you have still a very long way to go. But let me go a little bit back. Let me go a little bit back. You know, let's say when Paris 21 was created, it was created for a purpose. It was created for a purpose, for the dialogue between the policymakers and the statisticians. Probably right now, the Paris 21 has to broaden a little bit, because you may want to bring in another party which comes from the big data community and so on and so forth. But I think that we need to thank Homikaras for just inventing this name, the title, Data Revolution. It's nothing new here. When we started the PRSPs, it gave a data revolution. When we started the MDGs, you know, when the MDGs started, there were no indicators. At the policy level, they decided that we will create this nice future, and then the statisticians said, okay, and how do we measure? And then the statistical community came up with the 48 indicators, and that gave a big impetus to move the statistical process forward. Because the World Bank stepped in and said, okay, we will do loans now, because you know, that's very, very important. And the IMF stepped up, and the OECD, and a little bit the countries. And I think what you were saying today, that the countries are becoming a little bit more interested and putting in more money into that business. It's very, very important. It's one of the most crucial things, that the countries have to be in the driver's seat. Not only the poor statistical head of statistical agency, but the Minister of Finance. which is very important. So you need to define, so the data revolution is a new impetus. It's a little bit a new business. How do you do the business? Whom do you involve? And you spoke today about it. So I wouldn't make this big noise that the world will change, but this term will help the statistical systems to move forward. And I think you need to do a little bit more thought how to use this opportunity. Now, I'll give you a very simple example. Recently, there was a conference what's called the Revolution in the Eastern Europe. And I organized a session called Changes in Statistical Systems in Eastern Europe, Evolution or Revolution. You cannot imagine how many people were in the audience. So this, just this terminology will, I hope, will help a lot to move statistical systems forward.
Okay, I can change my mind. David can say something. He's a friend, you know, clientelism.
I was just moved to say something with great enthusiasm that's actually not that important. Which is that I discovered by accident a few months ago that the first use of the term data revolution, as far as I know, was actually by Nandini Uman on a Center for Global Development blog 3 years ago. She's saying we needed a data revolution. But the point remains that the HLP, the high-level panel, has done a great service in creating excitement around this by putting a term out there in a more popular way. I just want to offer a general thought for what it's worth, which is that weak data is usually the symptom of weak institutions. And so if we want to sustainably improve data, we're really talking about sustainable improvement in domestic statistical institutions, which is really hard to do. It's good work, and Paris 21 is doing some of it. We should keep at it. But probably sustainable institutional improvements are not achieved through outsider-driven revolutions. And so the term is both useful for generating excitement about something that has been neglected, but also a little bit potentially misleading, and so we need to ride this tiger in a smart way.
Okay, ride the tiger.
Okay, yes,
Yeah,
we need that
idea.
one. Okay, a couple of points. I fully agree with you on the quality issue, and I think even though, again, there are different views in terms of do you need to have the optimal status to start generating data? If you take Somalia, should they start not doing a census because some of the regions are still under conflict? UNFPA had to grapple that, and AFTB also was involved in the funding. Do you wait until all the conditions are there to start generating data, even though it will have some quality issues, or do you start with what is there? Policymakers do need some evidence to start having evidence-based policy. So a bit of nuance there, but I fully agree, and the point is taken. We will put quality a little bit higher. And I think that's also one of the reasons why the national statistical officers are so reluctant, and they've come under a lot of criticism for being reticent and towards this big data, open data. But their view, and we work a lot directly with them, is we can't put out that type of data. It's dirty, it's not vetted, it's not representative, all this. They have a lot of issues on quality. So I think in that sense, they also need to be understood as having a point of their credibility might be put into question further down the line. So point well taken. In terms of the domestic resource mobilization, I think that's extremely important. That's why also the work that we are going to do with the parliamentarians and the line ministries and ministries of finance is very important, because what we want to do is, yes, we will help you with the data literacy, statistical literacy, but this should translate into a sustained funding line for statisticians in your country. It's not just for you to better understand, it's also for you to understand that means also funding in a way that is not externally driven. And I do like very much this conditionality of the global partnership on education. I think that's really good in terms of and that's an issue because some of the projects that come with funding start doing baselines. And what we're doing is don't do these baselines for this project. It doesn't help us when we're looking into trends, and we can't use it. Just, you know, put that money into the national statistical bucket, as Johannes is one of Johannes's favorite words. So that type of conditionality is extremely important, and it's really welcome in that. And I think, again, also going back to Misha and David's point, I think it's very important, the revolution term. Having gone myself through a revolution in Tunisia, I can tell you it's not something I'm very, the hype is good at the beginning, but then you have lingering effects that can be very controversial. So the enthusiasm is good, but I think it's now time, when we're discussing this right before, I think we're beyond that understanding level now of what it is, and it's now time really to start shaping up in terms of actions, and through pilots, but also through specific actions, so that's good. And I think putting the statisticians in the driving seat is quite important, because we've seen it now in this post-2015 discussions where they're only coming now, and there are some expectations that are just unrealistic of having, once the new Sustainable Development Goals are put out, the expectations that by January 2016 the baselines will be there. It's just unrealistic, and we're looking into, in some cases, about 3 years of work until we get some kind of baseline. So it's important that they come now to the forefront and start saying, yes, we can help you with these goals, but that means also for us that and that type of work. And in addition to the ever-increasing panoply of goals that are currently being discussed, it's also really about the day-to-day work they'll have to work on.
Well, I mean, it's difficult to add to this. I think, first of all, great questions and great comments, which most of them I fully sympathize, just only to get on the quality, because if I hadn't responded, because I couldn't agree more. I think we mentioned it in our presentation, somewhat hidden, when I had the balance between innovative approaches and very quick data and vetted statistics, and having quality statistics. We didn't put the word quality, but we will make sure to put it next time. Just an additional thought, what I can see is we have to also unpack what quality statistics actually mean. And there is, again, a trade-off between, I think, the time it takes to, if you have data 3 years later, and sometimes 5 years later on certain trends, it's just too late. And policymakers, decision makers are not interested in this data. It could be super duper quality, but nobody cares, it's too late. So where do you put the cursor between, is it quality if the data on inflation is 3 days after the Lehman Brothers thing? The anticipation with this billion price project, what I learned, was they picked up the trend early on, and it would have been nice, or sometimes very useful to have this information, even if this is about to be right. So this is a debate, I mean, the community needs to have. And I think the innovation here could be also to link some of these fast coming up data with more established stuff, with censuses, or to think about the linkages between these different sources of data. And I think that's a technology question as much as an institutional question. So fully agree, quality is important, but let's also unpack a little bit what we understand by quality. And the second point, just to share a reflection, we had this debate probably also because there is the post-2015 and there's the Sustainable Development Goals. And everybody talked about this. But as has been said, I think we should have something we should think independently of the goal framework that will come up. We need to strengthen statistical capacity anyway, regardless if there would be post-2015 or SDGs. And we definitely also need not only to be focused on the 10, 11, 12, whatever number of goals, and then the indicators and data needed for this, but we also need to strengthen trade statistics, we need to strengthen national accounts. So we need to find a good balance in the debate about the data revolution, and how Misha and David put it, it's exactly, I fully sympathize with it, the way to go forward, to think it from the institutional side. And the only thing where I beg to slightly differ with Misha is that we should all. It's not about 2 people from Paris 21, as much as we can do. But I mean, it's an agenda for everybody here. So I invite you all to take part in it. Otherwise, we will not be able to make it.
Okay, well, with that, we're almost at 11:30, so I think that we'll wrap up. We'll have some results from our working group coming out in the new year, and we'll be blogging on that and have additional events, and I hope that we'll have you here again to talk about the advances that you've made in defining what the data revolution is, how it's going to happen. I think it's okay to use the term. I feel many of us are uncomfortable with it, but as Misha has so, people really come out for the data revolution. People like to be revolutionaries, so let's go with it. Okay, so thank you very much for taking time to